we started out by hearing that this missile had definitely come from Russia. Then we were told, well, actually, it may well have been from Ukraine trying to intercept a missile. Are we any the wiser as to what was the actual source of this missile that killed people in Poland?
Well, although we haven't seen definitive assessment of it, particularly by the Americans, who are probably the best placed, or indeed our own government, who are best placed to give an assessment, it appears from President Biden's remarks and from what we've heard coming out of the US that this was a Ukrainian interceptor fired at a Russian missile coming in. So obviously an accident. And I think, frankly, right from the early stages, the idea that a Russian missile would have landed in Poland in a relatively open area, a single missile, would almost certainly have been an accident anyway. It wouldn't have been a part of a deliberate attack on Poland. So I think that was relatively clear from the beginning. I doubt that picture will change very much.
And so, I mean, if I was being cynical, I would say that maybe it did come from Russia, but the NATO allies were desperate not to get sucked in directly into a war, and therefore it was easier to say that, well, it didn't come from Russia. Would that be overly cynical to think that that might be the case?
I think it's unlikely to be the case. I think if US or British governments are saying that it's a Ukrainian interceptor, that's probably what it is. If they're accurate in the technical information they've got. But frankly, even if it was from Russia, it's not a cause for war.
Can I just stop you there a sec, Richard? I say that because Philip and I were in Washington, D.C., speaking to the American advisors there, and a very straight question, actually, Philip, you put to them, should this happen? And we gave this as an example of what could happen. They said straight away, Philip, the answer was?
Well, they said that they would protect the integrity of NATO territory, every inch of NATO territory. But like I say, I mean, just tell people, Richard, about Article 5 and what it actually means in practice, if it is invoked.
Yeah, I mean, Article 5 means that an attack on one nation of NATO is an attack on all nations of NATO. It doesn't specify what the response must be. It doesn't say that every single nation must join a military response, although that would be expected if it was if it was necessary. For example, after 9/11. That was invoked as an Article 5 attack on the US, and other NATO countries were required to assist America, not all by going to war, but in various different ways. But I go back to the point I was beginning to make, which is that an accidental attack on a country, even if it's an enemy country, is not necessarily an act of war. Russia is responsible for what it did. Russia's responsible even if it was a Ukrainian anti-missile system. But it doesn't necessarily mean that should trigger a war. In fact, I would argue that if it was accidental, fired by Russia, then it should not trigger a war. And we've seen examples. I mean, earlier this year, there was an Indian missile fired accidentally into its enemy, Pakistan. That didn't trigger a war. There was a Turkish anti-aircraft system shot down a Russian combat airplane a few years back. That didn't trigger a war either. So I think while it doesn't remove any of the blame from Putin, I don't think it's the same thing as deliberate aggression.